World War II was the largest and most destructive conflict in human history. It involved more than 30 countries, caused the deaths of over 60 million people, and reshaped the political, social, and economic structure of the entire world. To understand how such a catastrophic war began, we must look at the events and conditions that followed World War I and slowly pushed the world toward another global conflict. The impact of World War I. World War I ended in 1918, but instead of bringing lasting peace, it planted the seeds of future conflict. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, placed full blame for the war on Germany. As punishment, Germany lost territory, was forced to pay heavy war reparations, and had its military severely limited. These harsh terms devastated the German economy and humiliated the nation. Many Germans felt betrayed and angry. Inflation skyrocketed, unemployment rose, and poverty spread. This environment of despair and resentment created the perfect conditions for extremist ideas to grow. Instead of stabilizing Europe, the treaty increased tensions and left Germany eager for revenge. The failure of the League of Nations. After World War I, the League of Nations was created to prevent future wars and encourage peaceful cooperation. However, the League was weak and ineffective. It had no army to enforce its decisions, and key countries like the United States never joined. When powerful nations violated international laws, the League failed to act decisively. This weakness allowed aggressive countries to expand without serious consequences, encouraging them to push even further. Rise of dictatorships. During the 1920s and 1930s, several countries turned to dictatorship as economic crises and political instability worsened. Germany, Adolf Hitler and Nazism. In Germany, Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933. He promised to restore Germany's pride, rebuild its military, and reverse the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's ideology, Nazism, promoted extreme nationalism, militarism, and racial superiority. Jews, Roma, disabled people, and political opponents were blamed for Germany's problems and faced increasing persecution. Italy, Benito Mussolini. In Italy, Benito Mussolini established a fascist dictatorship. He dreamed of rebuilding the Roman Empire and believed that war and expansion were the keys to national greatness. Japan, militarism and expansion. Japan faced economic problems and lacked natural resources. Its military leaders believed expansion was necessary for survival. Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931 and later expanded deeper into China, committing brutal war crimes. The League of Nations condemned Japan but took no real action, leading Japan to leave the League entirely. Aggression and appeasement. Throughout the 1930s, aggressive actions increased across the world. In 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia. Germany rebuilt its military in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. In 1936, Hitler sent troops into the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone. Britain and France responded with a policy known as appeasement, giving in to some demands in hopes of avoiding war. Many leaders believed that another war would be even more devastating than the first. The most famous example of appeasement was the Munich Agreement of 1938, where Britain and France allowed Germany to take control of the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. Hitler promised this would be his last territorial demand, but it was a lie. The Nazi-Soviet Pact. In August 1939, Germany shocked the world by signing the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact with the Soviet Union. Although Nazis and communists were ideological enemies, the pact secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. This agreement cleared the way for Germany to attack Poland without fear of Soviet interference. The invasion of Poland. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland using a fast and brutal strategy called Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war. It involved rapid attacks with tanks, aircraft, and infantry, overwhelming the enemy before they could respond. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had officially begun. Later in September, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, as agreed in the secret terms of the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Poland was quickly defeated and divided between Germany and the USSR. A world on the brink. By the end of 1939, Europe stood on the edge of chaos. Germany had proven its military strength. Democratic nations were unprepared for total war, and aggressive powers felt emboldened. Millions of people around the world were about to be drawn into a conflict that would last 6 years and change history forever. World War II was not a sudden accident. It was a result of unresolved anger, economic collapse, political extremism, and global failure to stop aggression early. As the war expanded, it would bring unimaginable destruction, heroism, and suffering on a scale never seen before. After the invasion of Poland in September 1939, World War II quickly grew beyond a regional conflict and became a truly global war. In just 2 years, fighting spread across Europe, Africa, and Asia. New military strategies, rapid invasions, and shocking defeats changed the balance of power and pulled more nations into the conflict. The Phony War. Following the fall of Poland, there was a period from late 1939 to early 1940 known as the Phony War. Britain and France had declared war on Germany, but little actual fighting took place on the Western Front. Soldiers waited behind defensive lines, especially France's Maginot Line, a system of fortifications built to stop a German invasion. Many believed the defenses were strong enough to prevent another German attack. However, this sense of security would soon be shattered. Germany's Blitzkrieg in Western Europe. In April 1940, Germany resumed its aggressive expansion. First, it invaded Denmark and Norway. Denmark surrendered almost immediately, while Norway fell after fierce fighting. These invasions secured vital supply routes and naval bases for Germany. In May 1940, Germany launched a massive attack on Western Europe, invading Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Instead of attacking the Maginot Line directly, German forces moved through the dense Ardennes forest, an area the Allies believed tanks could not pass through. This bold move shocked Allied commanders. Using Blitzkrieg tactics, German forces moved rapidly with tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry. The Netherlands and Belgium quickly fell, and German troops pushed deep into France. The fall of France. France, considered one of Europe's strongest military powers, collapsed in just 6 weeks. German forces surrounded Allied troops near the French coast. Over 330,000 British and French soldiers were evacuated in a dramatic rescue operation known as the Dunkirk evacuation. Despite the rescue, France could not recover. On June 14, 1940, German troops entered Paris. Days later, France officially surrendered. France was divided into 2 parts. Occupied France, controlled directly by Germany. Vichy France, a collaborationist government loyal to Hitler. The fall of France stunned the world and left Britain standing alone against Nazi Germany. The Battle of Britain. After defeating France, Hitler planned to invade Britain. However, before launching a ground invasion, Germany needed to destroy Britain's air power. This led to the Battle of Britain, fought mainly in the skies during mid-1940. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, launched heavy bombing raids on British airfields, radar stations, and cities. Britain's Royal Air Force, RAF, fought back fiercely, using radar technology and skilled pilots. When Germany shifted its attacks from military targets to civilian cities, including London, a bombing campaign known as the Blitz, Britain gained time to rebuild its air defenses. Despite massive destruction and civilian suffering, Britain did not surrender. Germany failed to gain air superiority, and Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely. This was Germany's first major defeat of the war. War in the Mediterranean and North Africa. While fighting continued in Europe, the war expanded into North Africa and the Mediterranean. Italy, led by Benito Mussolini, joined the war on Germany's side in 1940. However, Italian forces were poorly prepared and suffered defeats against British troops in North Africa. To support Italy, Hitler sent German forces known as the Afrika Korps, led by General Erwin Rommel, nicknamed the Desert Fox. Rommel proved to be a skilled commander and pushed British forces back in several battles. Control of North Africa was crucial because it affected access to the Suez Canal, a vital trade and military route. The war in Asia intensifies. While Europe was burning, war had already been raging in Asia. Japan continued its brutal expansion in China, committing atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed. Japan aimed to dominate East Asia and the Pacific. However, its expansion threatened Western colonial powers, especially the United States and Britain. In response, the United States placed economic sanctions on Japan, including cutting off oil supplies. These sanctions severely threatened Japan's military and industrial strength. Operation Barbarossa. Germany attacks the Soviet Union. In one of the most shocking moves of the war, Hitler broke the Nazi-Soviet pact. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history, attacking the Soviet Union. Millions of German soldiers poured into Soviet territory. Initially, the attack was devastatingly successful. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded, and vast areas were captured. However, the invasion stretched German supply lines, and Soviet resistance stiffened. The harsh Russian winter, combined with fierce Soviet counterattacks, slowed the German advance. This invasion opened the Eastern Front, which would become the bloodiest and most brutal front of the entire war. The world moves toward total war. By the end of 1941, World War II had expanded dramatically. Germany controlled much of Europe. Britain remained defiant. The Soviet Union was fighting for survival. Japan dominated large parts of Asia. The conflict was no longer limited to a few countries. It was becoming a total war involving entire populations, economies, and societies. The stage was set for even greater destruction, global alliances, and turning points that would decide the fate of the world. By 1942, World War II had reached a critical stage. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, controlled vast territories across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. For a time, their victories seemed unstoppable. However, this period marked the beginning of a dramatic shift. A series of decisive battles would change the direction of the war and set the Axis powers on the path to defeat. The importance of turning points. A turning point is a moment when the course of history changes. In World War II, turning points occurred when Axis advances were stopped and the Allies began to regain lost ground. These moments boosted Allied morale, weakened enemy resources, and proved that the Axis powers were not invincible. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad is widely considered the most important turning point of World War II in Europe. Germany launched an attack on the Soviet city of Stalingrad in 1942. The city was strategically vital because it controlled key transport routes along the Volga River and symbolized Soviet resistance. Hitler was determined to capture it at all costs. The battle turned into a brutal struggle for every street, building, and factory. Soldiers fought at close range in freezing conditions. Civilians were trapped in the city, suffering from hunger, cold, and constant bombardment. In November 1942, the Soviet Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive called Operation Uranus. Soviet forces surrounded the German Sixth Army, cutting off supplies. Despite Hitler's orders to fight to the end, the trapped German soldiers faced starvation and freezing temperatures. In February 1943, the German army surrendered. Over 300,000 Axis soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. This was Germany's first complete destruction of an entire army and a devastating psychological blow. After Stalingrad, Germany would never again regain the initiative on the Eastern Front. The Battle of El Alamein, 1942. In North Africa, the war also reached a decisive moment at the Battle of El Alamein in Egypt. German and Italian forces under General Erwin Rommel had pushed close to the Suez Canal, threatening Britain's vital supply routes. Control of Egypt could have changed the balance of power in the Middle East. In October 1942, British forces, led by General Bernard Montgomery, launched a powerful counterattack. With superior numbers, better supplies, and strong air support, the Allies broke through Axis defenses. El Alamein forced Axis forces into a long retreat across North Africa. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill famously said, "This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning." The victory marked the first major land defeat of German forces by the Western Allies. Operation Torch and the fall of Axis, North Africa. In November 1942, the Allies launched Operation Torch, landing American and British troops in Morocco and Algeria. This was the first major American ground involvement in the European War. Axis forces were now trapped between advancing Allied armies from the west and British forces from the east. By May 1943, over 250,000 Axis soldiers surrendered in North Africa. The victory secured the Mediterranean, reopened vital supply routes, and prepared the Allies for the invasion of Southern Europe. The Battle of Midway, 1942. In the Pacific, the turning point came at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. Japan had shocked the world with its attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, bringing the United States into the war. Japan then rapidly expanded across the Pacific, capturing islands and territories. Midway Island was a key strategic location. Japan planned to lure the U.S. Navy into a trap and destroy it. However, American codebreakers had intercepted Japanese communications and knew the attack plan in advance. During the battle, U.S. aircraft carriers launched surprise attacks that destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, while the U.S. lost only 1. This defeat was catastrophic for Japan. It lost experienced pilots and ships that could not be easily replaced. After Midway, Japan was forced onto the defensive for the rest of the war. The shift in momentum. These 3 battles, Stalingrad, El Alamein, and Midway, marked a decisive shift in momentum. Germany was pushed back in the east. Axis power collapsed in North Africa. Japan lost control of the Pacific Initiative. The Allies gained confidence, resources, and coordination. Industrial production in the United States and the Soviet Union surged, overwhelming Axis capabilities. The war becomes a struggle of survival. As the Axis powers began to lose ground, the war grew even more brutal. Civilians suffered from bombing campaigns, forced labor, and genocide. The Holocaust intensified as Nazi leaders attempted to exterminate Europe's Jewish population. World War II was no longer just a battle for territory. It was a fight for survival, ideology, and the future of humanity. By 1944, the tide of World War II had clearly turned against the Axis powers. Germany was retreating on the Eastern Front under relentless Soviet pressure, while the Western Allies prepared for the largest amphibious invasion in history. The final phase of the war in Europe would be marked by massive battles, heroic sacrifices, and the complete collapse of Nazi Germany. Preparing for D-Day. The Western Allies, Britain, the United States, Canada, and their partners, planned a bold invasion of Nazi-occupied Western Europe. The operation was known as Operation Overlord, and its success was vital to defeating Germany. To mislead the Germans, the Allies launched an extensive deception campaign called Operation Bodyguard, convincing Hitler that the invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. Fake armies, false radio signals, and double agents played a crucial role in this strategy. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. After months of planning and training, the Allies were ready. D-Day, the Normandy landings. On June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, over 156,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, France. The invasion began in the early hours with airborne troops dropped behind enemy lines to secure key bridges and disrupt German defenses. The amphibious landings took place on 5 beaches: Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, Sword. The fiercest fighting occurred at Omaha Beach, where American forces faced heavy German fire and suffered thousands of casualties. Despite overwhelming resistance, Allied soldiers pushed forward with extraordinary bravery. By the end of the day, the Allies had secured a foothold in France. D-Day marked the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. The liberation of France. Following D-Day, the Allies faced stiff resistance as they advanced through the Normandy hedgerows, a difficult landscape that favored German defenders. However, Allied air superiority and constant reinforcements slowly wore down German forces. In August 1944, the Allies launched Operation Cobra, breaking through German lines. Soon after, Paris was liberated on August 25, 1944, as French resistance fighters and Allied troops entered the city. The liberation of Paris was a powerful symbol of hope and marked the collapse of German control in France. Germany fights back, the Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, Hitler launched a desperate counteroffensive in the Ardennes forest, aiming to split Allied forces and capture the vital port of Antwerp. This surprise attack became known as the Battle of the Bulge. Initially, German forces created a bulge in the Allied front lines. Harsh winter weather, heavy snow, and freezing temperatures made fighting extremely difficult. American troops played a crucial role in stopping the German advance. The Siege of Bastogne, where U.S. forces held out against repeated attacks, became legendary. When asked to surrender, American General Anthony McAuliffe famously replied, "Nuts." By January 1945, the Allies had regained lost ground. The battle exhausted Germany's remaining reserves and marked its final major offensive in the West. The Soviet advance from the east. While the Western Allies advanced from France, the Soviet Red Army pushed relentlessly from the east. In 1944 and early 1945, Soviet forces liberated Eastern Europe, including Poland, Hungary, and Romania. The Red Army uncovered Nazi concentration camps, revealing the horrifying reality of the Holocaust. Millions of Jews and other persecuted groups had been systematically murdered. By April 1945, Soviet troops reached Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany. The fall of Berlin and Hitler's death. The Battle of Berlin was one of the final and bloodiest battles of the war. Soviet forces surrounded the city, engaging in fierce street-to-street combat. German defenses, made up of poorly trained soldiers and civilians, were no match for the overwhelming Soviet assault. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker. With their leader dead and their cities in ruins, German resistance collapsed. On May 7, 1945, Germany officially surrendered. The war in Europe ended the next day, celebrated as Victory in Europe VE Day on May 8, 1945. Europe in ruins. The cost of the war in Europe was unimaginable. Entire cities lay in ruins, millions were homeless, and countless families were destroyed. Germany itself was devastated, its infrastructure shattered, and its population suffering severe hardship. Although the war in Europe had ended, the conflict was not yet over. Fighting continued in the Pacific, where Japan refused to surrender. The world now stood on the brink of a new era, one shaped by victory, loss, and the urgent need to prevent such destruction from ever happening again. Although Nazi Germany surrendered in May 1945, World War II continued in the Pacific. Japan remained determined to fight despite devastating losses. The final months of the war were among the most intense and controversial, ending with the use of atomic weapons and the birth of a new world order. The island-hopping strategy. After the Battle of Midway, the United States adopted a strategy known as island hopping. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island, Allied forces targeted key islands that could serve as air bases and supply points. This strategy allowed the Allies to bypass heavily fortified positions and move closer to Japan itself. However, each island battle was brutal and costly. The Battle of Iwo Jima, 1945. One of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War was the Battle of Iwo Jima, fought from February to March 1945. The island was strategically important because it could serve as an emergency landing site for American bombers. Japanese forces had built an extensive network of underground tunnels and bunkers. They fought with extreme determination, refusing to surrender. After weeks of intense fighting, the U.S. captured the island. The famous photograph of American soldiers raising the flag on Mount Suribachi became a powerful symbol of sacrifice and victory. However, nearly 7,000 U.S. soldiers were killed, and almost the entire Japanese garrison died. The Battle of Okinawa, 1945. The Battle of Okinawa, fought from April to June 1945, was the largest and deadliest battle of the Pacific War. Okinawa was only about 350 miles from mainland Japan, making it a critical target for a future invasion. The fighting was savage, with heavy casualties on both sides. Japanese forces used kamikaze attacks, deliberately crashing planes into Allied ships. Civilians suffered immensely, trapped between opposing armies. Over 200,000 people were killed, including soldiers and civilians. The horrific losses at Okinawa convinced American leaders that an invasion of Japan would result in millions of deaths. The atomic bomb decision. Faced with the prospect of a prolonged war, U.S. leaders decided to use a new and terrifying weapon, the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The explosion instantly destroyed the city, killing tens of thousands of people. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, causing further massive destruction and loss of life. The bombings remain one of the most controversial actions in history. Supporters argue they ended the war quickly and saved lives. Critics argue they caused unnecessary civilian suffering. Japan's surrender. The atomic bombings, combined with the Soviet Union's declaration of war on Japan, forced Japanese leaders to accept defeat. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast, the first time many Japanese citizens had ever heard his voice. The formal surrender took place on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II was officially over. The human cost of World War II. World War II caused an estimated 60 to 80 million deaths, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. Civilians made up the majority of the victims. The Holocaust saw the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, including Roma, disabled people, political prisoners, and prisoners of war. Cities across Europe and Asia were reduced to rubble. Millions were left homeless, and entire generations were scarred by trauma. A new world order. After the war, the global balance of power changed dramatically. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers. Europe was economically and physically devastated. Former colonies began pushing for independence. To prevent future conflicts, the United Nations, UN, was created in 1945 to promote peace and international cooperation. Germany was divided, and tensions between the U.S. and Soviet Union soon led to the Cold War, a period of political and military rivalry that would last for decades. Lessons from the war. World War II showed the dangers of unchecked aggression, hatred, and indifference. It also highlighted humanity's capacity for resilience, courage, and sacrifice. The war reshaped borders, societies, and international relations. Its lessons continue to influence global politics, military strategy, and human rights today.